feel free to add people as we go. Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming along this afternoon. My name is Emma McKinley. I'm based at Cardiff University and I am part of the Welsh team who are leading the Welsh spoke for the MACC Hub. So the MACC Hub is Maximising UK Adaptation to the Climate Change Fund. And today's session we're really focusing on our flexible fund that we're launching today. So it's a really exciting part of the programme and we're really glad to see so many of you interested, so many of you coming along to today's session. As I mentioned, there's over 150 people that have signed up for today, and there's a number that have signed up for our second session on the 8th of July. And if for any reason you need to leave before the end of the session, please don't worry, we'll be recording the session and that'll be made available through our newsletter and on our website. And we also obviously will be running the second session in a few weeks' time, which you're more than welcome to come along to if you've had to miss part of today's session, and we'll be available over email and things as well if you have any follow-up questions that you need to ask us. So to get us started, I'm going to talk us through the plan for today and hope my slides move. Just before we get started properly in terms of the session itself, just some housekeeping. There are a lot of us on the call, so please do make sure that you are muted when we're all together in this plenary session, and that'll just make it a little bit easier for everybody to hear me. The plenary session, as I said, will be recorded and we'll be sharing that widely after the session is finished. To try and help us capture the questions that are being asked about the Flexible Fund, please do post your questions into the chat box. Members of the team will be capturing those and helping us build an FAQ document that we'll share alongside the call documents as well to make sure everybody has access to those questions. And we'll do the same with the second event that's happening in early July as well. So you can see, you know, there might be questions that you weren't able to stick around to hear the answer to, but we're going to make sure we can try to capture those and give you access to those as well. So please do pop questions in the chat, and that way, even if we don't get around to answering them in person today, we will make sure we answer those later. Also, it's worth noting that there may be questions that we aren't able to answer for you today, but as I said, we'll be capturing them. We'll make sure to go and clarify any points that we need to and respond to those at a later date in the FAQ document. So we will be responding to those in some way. So today's session, we've got about 2 hours, so just under 2 hours now. We're going to get through quite a lot today. The first session, part of the session will be very much in plenary and you hearing a little bit about the introduction to the MACC Hub and then the details about the Flexible Fund call. So we'll do a little bit of giving you some information about that, and then we'll be breaking out into groups to help do some sandpitting and networking for those of you who may be interested in developing collaborations and in applying for the Flexible Fund. There'll be opportunities for question and answers both before those breakout sessions and also at the end of the session again when we do our summary and wrap up. As I said, if you have any questions, and as I've just put in the chat, please do pop them into the chat function for us. And if it is something you'd rather ask in person, please do raise your hand and we can try to make sure we come to you. There are so many of you on my screen. I have 17 screens coming up, so I'm not going to be able to see everybody. So please do try and use your digital hands if you can, and that will help us keep track of everybody too. Okay, so our first speaker for this afternoon is from Helen Adams, who's our leader of the MACC Hub. She unfortunately isn't able to join us today, so she's recorded a short overview of the MACC Hub and also to give a bit of context to the Flexible Fund. So I am going to have to do some lovely tech changing around of slides and screens. So just give me 1 second while I do that, and hopefully we should be able to get Helen's recording. Can we see Helen's face on your screen now? Yes. Okay. Can you hear Helen? Did that work?
No, I don't think we can hear her.
Hang on a second, I'll just reshare again to make sure we get. There we go. Looks like this screen. Full screen. Now, this is the test. Can we hear? I need thumbs up from either side or Camilla when I press play.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Adams and I lead the MACC Hub. I'm here just to give a little bit of context to this call and our rationale behind it. So for those of you who've not come across MACC, the MACC programme is funded by DEFRA and the UK Research Councils, and includes a knowledge exchange and synthesis hub, that's us, with a role to sort of coordinate, to bring people together, to identify best practice knowledge on adaptation, synthesize it, get it to the right people. And then there are 6 research projects that are each looking into sort of a different sectoral element of adaptation. The MACC Hub, we have a series of activities to bring people together. We're doing work on training, we're doing work on using data and climate services. But one of the big things that we have is a flexible fund from the UKRI to distribute. So we are distributing that in 2 ways, partly through a policy response unit. We're working with DEFRA and the devolved governments on answering questions specifically to their needs. And the other part is this call. And the goals of this call are to really allow MACC, which I'd say in general is more focused, or has been focused, towards structural barriers and enablers of adaptation in the UK. So we think about things like legislation and policy, or systems thinking, and it's really the part of MACC that allows us to engage at the grassroots with people on the ground doing adaptation. So I think we have 3 goals for this call. The first is that one. The first is allow us to really support, enable, and get the findings from people doing the work of adaptation. The second is to really advance adaptation. So it's always been a goal of ours not to just collect and synthesize and generate knowledge on adaptation, but also to do the doing of adaptation. And that's why, you know, in this proposal, we're asking for minimum 30% of the funds to go to the sort of non-academic partners who are doing the work. And our third goal is, you know, and this is the key one, is to really advance our understanding of transformational adaptation and how you do that on the ground. So it can often seem too big, or we can't transform all of society, or too utopian. But actually what transformational adaptation is for us in the hub is any action that addresses the power dynamics that lead to people being vulnerable and exposed to climate change. And so we want to draw out the learning from that. And that means that actually a lot of these projects don't need to be about climate risks necessarily, if they are reducing vulnerability more generally. But really we want to show that transformational adaptation is possible. This is how you do it. And then I think the difficult work, and we'll really interested in projects on this, how do we then scale it, or then how do we then get that into higher level? I think I'll leave it there, but I just want to say, as you'll see from the call, this isn't a usual kind of funding call, so don't feel sort of hemmed in by usual UKRI approaches. We'll have an independent panel representing, you know, with representatives from diverse sectors and practitioners. And, you know, we're really looking for creative projects that are able to advance adaptation. The one thing I will say as well is this: you'll see in the proposal text, or the call text, that there's this requirement to work with us in collecting information on doing adaptation. And I think it will be light touch, it won't be too heavy, but it will be really important for us to get your reflections and to hear from you real time what's working, what's not working in all these different elements of trying to advance adaptation in the UK. So I hope the webinar goes well, and look forward to receiving your applications.
Thank you very much to Helen. I'm going to stop sharing that and move back to our slides. Give me a second. Even with 2 screens, it's never the most straightforward. I'd now like to hand over to Olivia, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of the current landscape for adaptation in the UK. Olivia, I can't see you on my screen, but I'm assuming you're here, and I will share my screen for you. Just let me know when you would like me to advance slides, and hopefully this should be coming up on your slide now. There you go. Is that okay?
Great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Just let me know when you'd like me to move forward.
Yeah, I will do. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Olivia, and I'm a senior analyst at the Climate Change Committee. And yeah, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the climate change risk assessment and adaptation reporting requirements for the CCC and kind of where that all fits in. So do you want to jump to the next slide, please? So the CCC are an independent body, and we advise the government on climate change risk and emissions from greenhouse gases. So we have a statutory remit that was written into law in the 2008 Climate Change Act, and that is to produce carbon budgets every 5 years, which set a pathway towards net zero in 2050. And our most recent of those was published in February this year. The other part of the Climate Change Act says that the government has to produce climate change risk assessments on a 5-yearly basis, and the CCC has a role as in producing an independent risk assessment to advise the government. And then on both of these aspects, we report regularly on progress in reducing emissions and progress in adapting to climate change. So we have an annual progress report on mitigation and an annual progress report to a biennial, so every 2 years, progress report on adaptation to Parliament. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the adaptation and risk assessment cycle next. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the Climate Change Act set in place this framework for governance really on risk assessment and adaptation. So that's a regular cycle of evidence collection to inform risk assessment under future climate change, and then a cycle that based on that risk assessment, which is produced every 5 years, with the last one in 2020. Well, the CCC's advice in 2021, the government then produces their own based off that in 2022. And then the national adaptation programs, which follow the publication of the risk assessment. So the sort of things that feed into the risk assessment. So we're currently preparing our advice for the 4th climate change risk assessment, which is due out next year, is an independent assessment, evidence base, and then the committee's statutory advice on adaptation and priority risks. Next slide, please. So this is probably really familiar context to everyone, but it's useful just to frame up, I think, the global context of where we are now relative to the targets of the Paris Agreement. So we're warming fast and faster than ever, and we're quite rapidly now approaching the 1.5 degree lower limit of the Paris Agreement. So this slide just sets out the time series from different observational centres around the world, with the smooth line being human-induced warming. And so we can see that by the early 2030s, we're expecting the world's climate to be at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So I think the key message from the committee in our most recent progress report is that this round of national adaptation programs and climate change risk assessment and ongoing efforts on adaptation are really the ones that have to prepare the UK for the effects of a world of 1.5 degrees warmer than pre-industrial. So it's a key emphasis on this being a near-term challenge of proactive adaptation, rather than leaving it too late and it becoming reactive. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? And so that was the global change, but this obviously maps down to the UK change. And I don't know if you've seen our most recent adaptation progress report, but that was published at the end of April. And we spend a bit of time in the report talking about some of the observed changes actually in the UK and some of the events that we've seen in the last few years that are sort of emphasize that this is a challenge right now, not just a challenge into the future. I'll just, if you skip to the next slide, please. So yeah, just in the interest of time, kind of scoot through to what the 4th climate change risk assessment is planning to do. So yeah, our last climate change risk assessment independent assessment was published in 2021, and for this one to be published in mid-2026, we want to update our evidence base to government, but an also key aspect of CCRA 4 is to support adaptation action by really highlighting the case for adaptation and the need to do it at urgent timescale and also at the required kind of spatial scale. And yeah, the key aim is to build on CCRA 3, but to ensure that the assessment is useful and usable by all decision makers at different levels. So the next slide, please. So this sets out what our independent assessment looks like. So it has 3 key components. The first is the technical report. So this is an update and identification of the key climate risks and opportunities to the UK, as well as an assessment of the urgency of taking action to manage each of these risks. So that's a kind of independent piece of evidence synthesis. We then have this second piece, the well-adapted UK report, and this is something that the CCC haven't produced before with the climate change risk assessment, but this really is looking at the solutions where the technical report is setting out the risks. The well-adapted UK report is our analysis that looked at what actions are needed to actually respond to the risks identified in the technical report and to try and look at target levels of climate resilience. We then have the third piece, which is the committee's statutory advice on policy actions needed in the next round of adaptation plans. Next slide, please. Okay, you probably can't see this, but I can share a link which has the Met Office's second call for evidence for the independent climate change risk assessment, which has the list of these risks. So these are the risks that are currently within CCRA 4. So they're slightly, if people are familiar with CCRA 3, we have slightly changed the risks, but we cover 5 key sectors of kind of society, economy and ecosystems. And there are 45 risks and opportunities in this round of the CCRA. So for each of these risks, there'll be an evidence base on the magnitude and urgency scoring, which will be published as part of the CCRA 4 technical report. Next slide, please. And then I just thought it'd be useful to touch upon the monitoring of adaptation, and so how the CCC actually looks at adaptation progress and some of the results from our most recent progress report, which I think will hopefully highlight the sort of evidence gap part of why this research at this level is really important. So how we monitor adaptation progress is for several different kind of systems across the UK. We have a kind of conceptual framework which we call a monitoring map, which looks at how we might get to a target. So this is just an example from the water sector of plentiful supply of water, what needs to be in place to achieve that via sort of more disaggregated targets, and then the required outcomes, enablers, policies that are sort of needed to set that in place. And we look at measuring on 2 scales. So we look at delivery and implementation. So that's how many of these, that's an assessment of whether adaptation is actually happening on the ground. And then we also have an assessment of the policies and plans. So that's like the extent to which high quality policies and plans are in place to support the outcomes. So yeah, in each of the sectors, we basically identify a set of outcomes and then routes to get there. And that's the sort of goal at the top here in the plentiful supply of water. And this is something that for the well-adapted UK report, we're developing further over the next few months. So the next slide, please. So our most recent progress report in our assessment of adaptation, delivery and implementation, there's kind of clear conclusion that the committee felt that implementation remains inadequate across the UK. We didn't find a single of our outcome areas, so that's the top level of the monitoring map, that had evidence of good delivery on adaptation. And overall, the picture was that progress was quite slow has stalled or in some cases is heading in the wrong direction. I think probably particularly relevant to this call is that for 20% of outcomes, we didn't have enough indicators to assess overall progress accurately at the national scale. That's those kind of grey bars that are marked out here. So across all sectors, we had aspects where we felt we didn't have enough evidence to assess whether adaptation was being delivered. And the committee have said repeatedly that monitoring and evaluation remains a blocker to effective progress monitoring across sectors. In many cases, we have to rely on proxy indicators as substitutes for direct measures of adaptation. And for nearly all outcomes, I think there's a lack of clarity on what are key indicators and what levels indicators should have to reach. In some cases, we have data about how many measures are being installed, but then the link back to risk reduction is often the thing that's missing. So this is something that we are considering in our monitoring and evaluation work stream for CCRA 4. And just get to the next slide, please. So just finish up with the policies and plans scores. So I mentioned we score on 2 dimensions. For this report, we found that some adaptation planning exists in most areas, but high quality planning was lacking. And the sort of differentiation between a yellow and a green score here is often around ambition, but also credible, that the plan sets in place the enablers insufficiently as well. So you could have a good plan, but is it sufficiently funded? Does it set out clear guidance, responsibilities, governance structures, all the things that kind of mean that it is able to be delivered on the ground? So I think we did find some major gaps in adaptation efforts across policies and plans, but some evidence of good progress and some evidence of increasing thinking around interdependencies, particularly in the infrastructure sector, which led to some of those green scores. So final slide, please. So these were the committee's 4 key areas of action that we identified in the most recent progress report. And the first is around setting objectives and targets. And we really think this is the first step to provide an actionable and measurable framework for government and beyond. And this includes targets and objectives, not just for central government, but for the private sector, for local government, for households, for all the other actors involved in delivering and funding adaptation. We then had 2 areas which are sort of linked around coordination across government, so ensuring that adaptation is more tightly integrated with wider government resilience efforts and other key policy agendas, and that it's supported with sufficient resources and kind of adequately incorporated in forthcoming strategies and plans. We felt that the government's policy agenda can help close some gaps, but it just needs adaptation to be really tightly embedded within all sectors. And then, yeah, this final one in the light purple here was that adequate monitoring and evaluation, and that needs to be underpinned by regular data collection and reporting. And this is essential to track not only the climate change risks, but also the impacts and the effects of adaptation measures at the national level. I think it's really key that we learn from what is effective and what is happening, and the committee feels that this is a long-standing gap that should finally be closed in this next round of national adaptation programmes. So yeah, I will stop there.
Thanks so much, Olivia. I think it was really important for us to make sure that the flexible fund projects as we go forward are grounded in the priorities and needs that you've set out really nicely in that session. So hopefully that's provided some really useful context for those of you who are interested in applying for this funding. And I think what you also did was really nicely set the scene as to why we're really keen and in kind of ensuring that we are not only kind of tracking success in inverted commas, but also thinking about what the lessons learned have been, how we can contribute to those evidence bases, and how the projects can work towards developing successful pathways to transformational adaptation over the next 12 months from when they're funded. So thank you, that was really, really useful context. These slides will be sent around with the recording, so we'll make sure you get them as well. And I think Olivia will probably be sticking around for a little while, so if you do have any questions, she may be able to ask them for you and answer them for you as well. Great, thank you. I am going to now give you a bit of an overview of the Flexible Fund, the call and also the application process. And this has definitely been a collective effort for the whole MACC team, and many of us have been involved in developing this and trying to make it a call that is responding to those needs that Olivia really helpfully set the scene for, but also is providing opportunities for us to test things on the ground. So Helen's already given you an overview and an introduction to the MACC Hub generally. This part of the project, the Flexible Fund, seeks to really contribute and add and complement the existing MACC Hub programme, as well as the MACC research projects that are already ongoing. We want to really focus on learning about what works in terms of climate adaptation by learning by doing, and really focusing on place-based approaches and engaging communities and non-academic partners in that process. I saw there were some questions already around partnership approaches, and that's very much in the ethos of this Flexible Fund approach. Our hope is that we will be able to catalyse transformational climate adaptation through the project by supporting these smaller scale place-based adaptation projects, recognising that really delivering true transformation in a 12-month period is very unlikely to be possible, but we're hoping that the projects will be able to start to catalyse that change and develop those pathways to impact, as I mentioned. And really, really crucially, the part of the ethos and the point behind the call is to really foster meaningful collaboration between academia, so research funding eligible institutions, but also policymakers, businesses, communities, voluntary sector, and really ensuring that we're bringing those different groups together to maximise project outputs and to maximise impact on the ground as well. So before I get into the details and the kind of the specifics of the call, just some of the high level kind of criteria and things that we're looking for within proposals are the following. So the first is that the projects are place-based, and that can be on specific geographical areas, but also different types of place. So it could be coastal places, urban environments, rural environments. We're really going to make sure that we try and take a portfolio approach to looking at projects across the UK and the Republic of Ireland, as well as an opportunity for cross-border collaboration around transformational adaptation. But really they are place-based and they address those local needs and those local challenges, which is part of why the community element is so important. The MACC programme generally is really centering vulnerability and thinking about those groups that are most vulnerable to climate change. And that might not always be what's expected, and that will be different for different communities. But the proposal should really clearly demonstrate that they've considered groups and places that have different types of vulnerabilities to climate change, and that that's being accounted for within thoughts around adaptation. The proposals should be aligning with existing policy needs. So we've had that really helpful presentation from Olivia, and there are some different links to evidence needs and policy gaps in the in the call text as well, but really wanting to ensure that we are aligning the projects with clear relevance to either current or emerging policy needs at either a local, regional or national level, and that could be across the devolved administrations, but also UK-wide. I've already mentioned that projects really need to centre community engagement and really demonstrate meaningful collaboration with local communities, and that can be a very broad set of different stakeholders and sectors and audiences that can be integrated into the project partnerships. We would like projects to have measurable outcomes, so they're prioritising implementation and that learning by doing, and are really able to test practical adaptation actions that can be reflected upon in real time to allow us to do that learning that we've already mentioned. We want to think about where we might be able to gather valuable insights into what the enablers or the barriers of transformational adaptation might be. And we're really keen to see innovative approaches to thinking about transformational adaptation. So that could be novel methods for synthesis, for dissemination of information, and also technological innovations. Proposals should also think about impact and scalability. So making sure that we think about how we can contribute to meaningful and sustainable outcomes beyond the funding period. So projects can be a maximum of 12 months. So we want to make sure that the project is thinking about what their impacts will be beyond that. and that they're seeking to reduce vulnerability, improving that overall resilience and driving lasting change. So really think of those successful pathways to impact and moves towards transformational adaptation. In terms of the funding available, we have a total pot of £550,000, which will cover up to 10 MACC flexible fund projects. There's a typo on the slide, but it's 550,000. And projects can be up to a total of 55,000 per project. We're hoping to award between 10 and 12 projects, and depending on how many come in, but it's likely to be 10 if people go for the total, the maximum amount of 55,000. And I should point out that that is full economic costs of 55,000. Research eligible organisations are bound by the usual UKRI funding restrictions and will be able to claim 80% of their full economic costs. Organisations outside that group can claim for 100% of their costs as well. I mentioned already that projects can be up to 12 months. We're not saying they have to be 12 months, but they should be up to 12 months. So whatever time period the project proposal thinks is appropriate for testing and ensuring that transformational adaptation, but no longer than 12 months is possible because of the time limits that we're in within this programme. And I've mentioned already that we're expecting to fund between 10 and 12 projects, depending on the budgets that come in on the projects that we get. In terms of project partnership and leadership, so the projects must be led by a UK organisation which is eligible to receive UKRI funding. So it must be one of the UK research eligible institutions. That includes the higher education institutions, the universities, but it can also involve organisations such as the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, the research institutions. So yeah, it's not just academic universities that can lead, and we'll send a list of those, a link to the list of those in the call text as well. I've mentioned already that the projects must centre collaboration, and so single institution applications won't be considered. There must be a partnership between those research eligible organisations and others outside that group. A minimum of 30% of the total funding must be allocated to those non-HEI or non-research funding eligible partners to ensure that we're really trying to make sure there's adequate funding being allocated to community groups who might need that money to test things on the ground. I've mentioned already that the projects must be a partnership and that we won't be considering single organisation applications. Lead applicants therefore need to have an employment contract which ends no earlier than the proposed timeframe of the proposal submitted, so that the lead individual is employed for the duration of that 12 months or that 9 months, however long that project goes on for, and must not have a conflict of interest with the MACC Hub, so must not be one of our collaborators, a member of the advisory group, a member of the programme advisory group or the Hub advisory group, or associated with any of the MACC research programmes. We want to make sure that the Flexible Fund is complementing that broader programme of work and adding to it rather than benefiting those who are already funded through this programme. So that's one thing to really strongly highlight. And of course, the lead institution should be able to demonstrate that they have the capacity to distribute funding to partners as required, and making sure that it's done in a timely and accountable manner. Some key dates, and we will remind you of these shortly as well, and we'll remind you at the end of the session. But first thing to note, of course, you're here today, so you're here for this online information session. We have a mandatory expression of interest session that you must submit by 5 p.m. on the 8th of August with a short EOI form. All project proposals must submit that to be eligible to submit a final application. Full applications, which are quite short, must be submitted by 5 p.m. on the 30th of September to allow us to review those and by panel throughout October and to make an awards announcement in November. Our expectation is that projects must start by the end of January 2026, which would allow us projects to run for a year and then be able to feed into that evaluation, that learning process for the broader MACC programme. In terms of proposal submissions, applications can be submitted in written, audio or video formats. We're really keen to ensure that we are being inclusive and that the approach is as accessible to communities as possible. So we've adopted a multi-application format process. So written applications should use the form that's provided and that there are links to in the call text and on the project website. But we will also consider audio or video applications. So if that's something that you would like to do and you're one of those applicants, there's some guidelines that we would like you to adhere to. So videos or recordings for each section should not exceed 3 minutes. So it should be about a 300-word answer. Or 5 minutes, depending on the length requirements for that section. So please do check that if that's an approach you'd like to take. Ensure that the answers are addressing the questions of sections clearly and they're using commonly supported file formats, such as the ones listed here. Please do, if you do decide to use this format to submit your applications, please ensure that you've checked the recording to make sure that we can hear or see the recording and make sure there's no significant background noise or anything that would detract from your application. In terms of the form, we just thought it would be useful to go a quick overview of the sort of sections that you'll see within that. Obviously, you'll have your project title, a short project summary, and an overview of project objectives. Obviously, things like your start and end dates, the location both of the project and of the organisation. So there's no expectation that if you were an organisation based in Wales that you would only be working in Wales. You could be working with partners in Scotland if that was what was appropriate for your project. So having that information for both the location of the project and the organisations involved would be really valuable. Having a short project description and rationale, so 500 words, a short description of the methods and approach, a section on outcomes and impact, a short section on project management, how the project will consider and centre equity, diversity, inclusivity, and that's really important given the vulnerability lens that we're taking through the project. Any ethical considerations that you might need to consider for your project, description of the team experience, and then of course budgetary information, including your total budget, how that will be allocated across your partners, and a justification of resources. Moving on now to proposal assessment. So awards will be based solely on the submitted application. So that's why it's really important if you do decide to go down the video or recording route that we make sure it's of high quality, because that's what the panel will be given to assess. I mentioned already the deadline is 5 p.m. on the 30th of September, and late applications will not be accepted and will not be assessed as part of that set of projects. We won't be doing interviews as part of the assessment, so it will be solely on the application. And applications will all be reviewed by an independent panel, and we'll undergo a shortlisting process before that shortlisted set of projects is then reviewed more thoroughly by the panel and has a further discussion before the final decisions are taken. Our evaluation criteria are going to include ensuring that the proposals have an overall alignment with the call and consideration of those key call criteria that I just talked through. An evaluation of the approach and methodology and consideration of the approaches to transformational adaptation and replicability across the UK that have been expressed within the proposal. The suitability and the feasibility of the method and how relevant it is to emerging policy needs. Ensuring that you've got that evidence of community-led initiative and local benefit, ensuring that there's that focus on vulnerability. A section on project management, resourcing, value for money and deliverability, and then impact as well. We will be taking, the panel itself will be taking a portfolio approach to reviewing the proposals to ensure that we are complementing the projects that already exist and through the MACC programme and that address the MACC programme objectives. So that will include taking consideration of the spread of topics that are funded, the geographies and place types that are funded to ensure that projects aren't all funded from one part of the UK, that we're making sure that that is balanced across all 4 countries and also across different types of places. So as I mentioned earlier, whether those are urban, rural, upland or coastal. To account for different scales of project implementation, so they could be very small scale, very, very local community, but also could be broader scale as well. To account for different sectors related to transformational adaptation, similarly to different policy areas, and then also accounting for equity and ensuring that inclusion of research funding eligible organisations. It's a bit of a mouthful, that one, in delivery, and making sure they've got a really strong focus on community collaboration in project implementation. It's already mentioned by Helen that the expectation will be that these projects become part of the MACC Hub family and the broader programme. So flexible funded projects that are successful will then be invited to attend MACC Hub internal meetings as appropriate, ongoing webinar series, and the annual conference that we're running. The first one of those is planned for later this year in September. The projects will also contribute to overall monitoring and evaluation of the MACC Hub and feeding into UKRI reporting. So we will be wanting to get information around the types of impacts coming out of your project, the different number of people engaged, how you've engaged in this, etc. But also really supporting the synthesis of those lessons learned from the MACC Flexible Fund call. That will be through a process being led by one of our partners, which is likely to involve short interviews with the successful project leads, completing some online reflective diaries to try to capture those really critical lessons learned moments, because that's the thing we really want to think about, is how can we as a community support and deliver successful transformational adaptation and work towards a well-adapted UK, as Olivia said. There'll be a short debrief workshop later in the programme, so we'll be asking people to participate in that. And we will be providing briefing and training to the successful projects. So there's no need to panic, but we just wanted to make sure that you're aware that that was something we would be asking successful projects to support going forward. You can access the funding call, which has just been made live today on our website by scanning the QR code here, and the slides will be shared alongside links after today's session, so we'll make sure that you have access to that in a number of different ways. But for now, I think we can open up to some Q&A, and I've seen the chat getting very excited, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now so that we can open up to you all from Q&A. And let me open the chat up.
So Emma, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So the first one is, explain what exactly you mean by transformational adaptation. I can take that one if you want, Emma.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Camilla.
So in the MACC Hub, we've been working on a definition for transformational adaptation, and at high level, it is the project is defining it as a systemic and integrated approach to addressing climate risks, one that requires challenging societal, economic, and political systems. I believe there's a bit more information of that in the cool text, which Saif has left a link to. Another question we've got is, has any research been done into central government funding for adaptation, i.e. delivery, not research?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Would the person who asked that question like to come on and ask that question? And we can try and answer it. Gerald, yes, Gerald, of course.
Hi, yeah, it's Gerald Power from Lambeth Council. We're about to hit a heat wave. We're in a heat wave. We're already struggling. We would dearly love to be actually implementing solutions we know that work, but we are desperately short of any kind of funding. It would be so helpful if there was some research that said, or just looked at the gap between the money available to a local authority and the money required for adaptation. Because we are doing research, we know research is needed, but there's so much that we could be funding now if we had the money.
Yeah, okay. Challenges around funding for adaptation is definitely something that we as a hub, we won't be a surprise to anybody, but we have highlighted and has come up through our own conversations. But we can take that away and look to see if there's anything we can send. But I think that's an important point to raise. Thank you, Gerald.
We've got another question here. How does partnership working, VCS and academics fit into the project?
Thank you. So I am interpreting VCS as the voluntary and community sector.
Community sector, yeah.
Great. That those groups would be fine. So to the person who asked that question, that would be something we would expect to see and would very much encourage to see those relationships and that partnership between an academic institution and a voluntary or community group. So yes, that would be an appropriate partnership, absolutely. Not the only type of appropriate partnership, but it would be one of them, yes.
Great. Then we've got another one on the funding pot seems quite small for 12 months. And yeah, I can take that if you want, Emma. So yeah, we recognise that current funding pot is limited and it might not fully cover the cost of a full-time equivalent over 12 months. However, 12 months is the maximum length of the project. So it could be a 6-month project, but yeah, a maximum of 1 year.
Yeah, we have a lot of discussion about the scale of funding to offer and the length of time to deliver projects, and it's been something that as a group we have gone backwards and forwards on a lot, because we really wanted to ensure that there was funding available for projects as much as possible. We've gone with the amount that we have with 55,000 as a maximum for projects, and that's been on advice with our series of knowledge exchange partners who are part of the team, who are linked to a number of different local authorities and different community groups across the UK, to really get guidance on what would be appropriate. And we've had quite mixed messages on that. Like, some have said actually for quite small pots of money, for 10,000, 15,000, we can actually do quite a lot, and others that have said, as you've raised, that it's not a lot of money for a longer term type of project. So we had to work within the budget that we had, and we wanted to try to fund a good number of projects to really try and deliver as much impact as possible. But yeah, we recognise that there are limitations to what is possible within the funding available and the time frame. But as Camilla said, the 12 months is a maximum rather than a compulsory.
Great, thanks, Emma. We've got some here around what's the anticipated success rate of the if 10 projects are expected to be funded, how many applications are expected? I guess this one links to the EOI.
Yeah, that was part of why we wanted to do that EOI process, because really we don't know how many to expect. Across the 2 webinars that we're running, I think we have over 200 people registered for the 2 sessions for today and for in July. But how that will translate into number of applications, we don't know. So yeah, we don't know what our success rate will be, because it's the first time we've run this type of call within the programme, and it's hard to know what the uptake will be. We will be able to send out updates on the number of applications that we've come through the EOI process, and so can look into making that overall number available and kind of say that, I don't know, X number have been submitted to EOI, so that decisions can be taken by project partnerships if they feel that it's not something they can continue with, if they feel that the success rate might not be what they want to go with. But yeah, we don't know. It really depends on how many of you on the call decide to apply and what size your project teams are.
Great, thanks, Emma. So next question is there's ones around eligibility. I can see that so yeah, the Met Office have asked a question. They're involved in the MACC hub, so want a bit of clarification on if they would be able to also apply for this fund. I think somebody else has also said something around those lines.
Yeah, I think for some of the bigger organisations like the Met Office and other groups, I think we'll need to actually double check, because obviously if we're taking a whole organisation approach, that will preclude a lot of people. So if it's all right with the person that asked that question, I'd like to clarify that. I saw that question come in, but I would like to clarify that point, particularly for those bigger organisations. And I saw another question from somebody who'd asked a similar question around the joined up landscapes and what kind of associated with MACC is. So I will clarify those and make sure we include those in the FAQ document that comes out alongside the call text, if that's okay.
We've got another one on, are we helping partners to network after this event? I can take that one if you want, Emma.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so at the end of this session, we do have a MS Teams form that we invite you to fill out, where you can put in your contact details, and then we can try to matchmake you. If you don't find anyone in your breakout rooms, we'll try our best to do that. Right, what else have we got here? Oh, we did have one I saw about, can you submit a mixture of written and video?
That is not a question we considered.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good question. I would think for ease that it would be one format. So the application should be submitted as one format. So if you're doing a written application, it is a written application, and if it's a video, the whole thing is done as video or audio.
I can see we've got a hand up.
Oh, yeah.
Sapphire Growth on Demand.
Do you want to come in? Oh, there you go. Do you want to ask your question?
I don't. I think.
Oh.
I think you might have some microphone difficulties.
Yeah.
If you want to drop it into the chat, then we can answer that.
Oh, come on screen.
Whilst we wait for that one, we've got another one here. Are councils eligible for funding?
Yeah, councils can apply for funding, be part of the partnerships. Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. Not as a lead partner necessarily, because they need to be lead partners, as I said, should be institutions that are eligible for UKRI funding. But councils can be part of the partnership and will be eligible for the projects.
Right. What else have we got? You mentioned that up to 80% funding would be available for FEC organisations, and the 100% funding would be available for other groups that are outside, i.e. not FEC. Could you clarify what types of organisations would be eligible for 100%?
So the FEC is full economic costs rather than the type of organisation. The organisations that are subject to only obtaining 80%, those are organisations that are bound by UKRI funding rules. So that's those groups that are research funding eligible, and that is standard UKRI funding guidance and how we apply for funding generally. So organisations outside that, that group, so universities and research institutions, they are ones that would be eligible to claim for more of their costs, but they can't include overhead. So it's 100% of their time cost, but can't include overhead costs, I don't think. Again, we can double check that and make sure that's clarified in the call text. But that's the difference between those groups.
Great, and I see the Severine Growth on Demand, who was trying to get through earlier, has dropped her question in the chat. What are the requirements necessary to lead an application? Can you have multiple partners?
Thank you for that question. Yes, absolutely. So the requirements for leadership are, as I mentioned, that lead organisations are eligible for UKRI research funding. So they're on the list of UK research funding eligibility. And yes, you can have multiple partners. Absolutely. We well, not even can have. We've taken the decision that we're centering that idea of collaboration and partnership, and that single organisation applications wouldn't be considered to be part of the call that we're looking for. So partnership is definitely something that will be central to proposals.
Great, thanks, Emma. We got another one, which is also about requirements for the project, but this is regarding the requirement for projects to be place-based. How big is place? Can it be a county, for instance, or if so, should it be county-based but focused on settlements, or are you only looking for settlement scale solutions?
Thank you for that question. There isn't really a set geographical boundary that we're working with. Again, we had a lot of conversation about that. It is about justifying and rationalizing the place kind of lens that you'll be taking in your project and ensuring that it's focusing on working at a local scale and with communities. So there's not necessarily a boundary that has to be county or has to be within certain geographical boundaries. That answered your question.
Thanks, Emma. Conscious we've got one more minute. I did see there was one on the structure that we described for the EOI. Is that the same for the application? Just wonder, Emma, if you could maybe just recap on the difference between those two and what they look like.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So the structure I talked through was the more detailed structure for the full application rather than the EOI. The EOI is a much shorter form, which I think is available already, actually, and we can make sure we put that link in. But it's much shorter and is a title, estimated budget, expected partners, short overview of the project, no more than 500 words. So it's a much shorter application form. The detail I talked through was the full application.
Great. Okay, that's time now for questions. If people do have questions that we haven't answered yet, we will be creating an FAQ document, so please do pop them in the chat and we'll be compiling them afterwards and sharing those. So now, Emma, I think we've moved on. We've got a break before the Sandpit sessions.
We do, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions. I'm aware there are some that we didn't manage to get to, and so what we will do is we'll try and go in and answer them in the chat, but also we'll be compiling. We've been taking them and saving them into another document, and they'll go into the FAQ document to make sure that we can respond to them. The same will happen in the Sandpit sessions. If there are any questions your facilitators can't answer, we'll keep those and we'll make sure that we look at those and we respond to them afterwards. So please do keep an eye on the website for that FAQ, where we're hoping to compile all those answers in the next few days. Okay, so we'll now take a short break for 10 minutes to give everybody a bit of an opportunity to stand up. I know we're all in lots of meetings, so please do take a break and come back to join us for about 22-3, and then we'll be bringing it into breakout sessions so we can support some of that networking and facilitate that relationship building through these Sandpits. Thank you very much, and we'll see you shortly.